King Anu wasn't always the king. Alalulu, probably pronounced wrong, was a king before him. Now, what happened was Alalulu's predecessor fell out of a window. Yes, on Nibiru they had windows, and died. Now, Alalulu then said, I should be rightful heir, but so did Anu. There was a tribunal, and what happened was Alalulu got the position of king, and Anu was sort of head statesman, really, for the planet. After X amount of cycles, I think it was 3 or 4 cycles of their planet going around our sun, Anu challenged Alalulu, and Alalulu accepted to a wrestling match. They do wrestling as a way of combat to find out who should be king. And Anu beat Alalulu, and Alalulu fled to on a ship to Earth, which is where he found the gold. Alalulu, who found the gold on Earth, went back to Nibiru, told everyone that there was gold on Earth. So he was sort of vindicated, and he came back, I think, with the party of 50 that came to Earth. Now, he was respected then because he was the guy that found the gold, and sometime later when King Anu came, there was a wrestling match between the two because Alalulu wanted still to be king. Alalulu lost, and that's the foot there of King Anu. Now, once Anu took his foot off, Alalulu bit something very private, and then was banished away, and Alalulu went with his grandson, to Mars. Now, that grandson becomes very important later on, so keep watching. After Alalulu bit the private parts of King Anu, he was sentenced by the 7 judges to exile, and so he chose to go to Mars with his grandson. So Alalulu stayed on Mars. Now, that brings us to the question, was there life on Mars? Because obviously this is written facts that we can't dispute unless you think it's mythological, someone just writing them for the fun of it, this huge backstory. So if we believe that this is all real, then he stayed on Mars, and the Aigi was there as well. So was Mars inhabited with life back then? Now, this was less than what mainstream say. Mainstream say about 4 billion years ago was when the last time it had water on it, but maybe it didn't. Maybe there was that nuclear war that I've mentioned before. Around 415,000 years ago, Ninjarag came to Earth as the chief medical officer. Now, she was the sister of Enki and Enlil and son of Anu. Now, she stopped at the away point, which we know is Mars. Now, she found Alalulu, who I mentioned in the last video, dead. But what was interesting is his grandson, who was living on Mars with him, created a face as a tomb for Alalulu on Mars. So that's apparently the face on Mars belongs to him, which is really interesting if that's true. Now, I have to quickly say, yes, that time again, frigedooralarm.com. If you go to the site, if you want to just go straight through to eBay, it's just one click from that button, and that's the eBay listing there, only $12.99, and it's got different settings. So it's got a timer setting, but you can also have it so it beeps. You've probably worked out that our ancient past has a lot better storylines than EastEnders. So Ninjarag, who was on Mars, left Mars to come to Earth, and she was with child. Yes, so her son was Ninurta, who was also Enlil's son. So remember, they were brother and sister. Technically, they were half brother and sister. Now, they were out of wedlock, which was apparently a naughty thing to have done. Now, if you look at the time scale, there was tens of thousands of years had passed since Enlil had come here to Earth. So you can imagine how long their birth takes if he hadn't, unless he went back, and we've not been told, and I'll have a word with him about that. But no, so we don't know whether he went back, but the first information that she came here is what we've got in our text. Now, she came and she stayed in a place called Sipor, where she became the sort of head medical person. And we can know all of this because actually they've given us maps along with the cuneiform tablets, so we can sort of fairly surely say that this is all correct. Now there's other places as well that became important around that same time. So this was now getting on to about 360,000 years ago, so bear that in mind. They haven't created man at this point, so 360,000 years ago. This place here, Bad Tiberia, yeah, I'm pronouncing it wrong, was set up to refine the gold that they was getting from Abzu. Now, if you've watched the other videos, you know that Abzu is South Africa. Some other notable places is Lagash and Lhasa. What they were kind of set up for incoming spacecraft to, have somewhere to the people, the Anunnaki, to go to. So there were sort of cities that once they arrived, they would go to these places here. And there's Eridu, as I mentioned previously. So it's all heating up now. There's more to come. Don't worry. There's going to be fights and all sorts of stuff. So the Anunnaki have really told us everything that we really need to know. And I hope you're all enjoying it still. I am. Oh, you're going to absolutely love this plot twist. So, 300,000 years ago, Zu, if you remember, was actually the grandson of Alalulu, if you remember, the guy that bit the king's private parts. So the grandson was on Mars, if you remember, where we left the story. And 300,000 years ago, he was the one that actually, after his father had passed, as we know, he was the one that went and helped the Aegi, and then went down to the planet, and then ended up with the fight with Ninurta. So that's the grandson of Alalulu, which kind of makes sense because Alalulu seemed to be a bit of a character as well. So it's all making sense now, and it's far better than TV shows. So keep tuned and I'll keep going. 300,000 years ago, the Anunnaki workers that were mining got really angry and went to Enki and his sister, Ninsharag, I'm totally pronouncing them wrong, and said, look, blah, 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 we don't want to work anymore, our conditions are terrible. So they come up with the idea to create a slave worker, based on the indigenous characters that were on Earth at the time. Now, this is a reconstruction of someone that may have been on Earth. Now, they went to Enlil and suggested this, and they went to their king, which was King Anu, and suggested this idea. But Enlil said, no, absolutely not. We can't make him in our image because it should only be, true bloodline. It should only be the one true creator that could create people like us, blah, blah, blah. But the Council of Seven that do the rulings ruled, yes, create a slave. Enki was in South Africa at the time because he was doing helping with the mining. So they captured some wild men, as they called them, which really were the indigenous species at the time. Now, it could have been Homo erectus, could have been Homo florensis, it could have been any of them, really. We're not 100% sure. So they managed to capture and start doing many tests, many failed. And eventually they managed to create Adam, which, as we know, technically is human as an individual or mankind as a collective. It actually came with a U as well, Adamu, because they always seem to stick funny letters at the end of their words as opposed to what we do, or we shorten them, either way. And eventually they managed to create a slave race from the indigenous species using Enki's sister to bear the child from artificial insemination. When I was talking in the last videos about Ninurta, he obviously attacked and beat Anzu, or Zu. And that was around 300,000 years ago. Now, obviously, his mum turned up 300,000 years ago to Earth, expecting a child, which was Ninurta. So when we say things like, 300,000 years ago, there could be a difference between 5,000 years, which is quite long. So obviously, by the time Ninurta went off and attacked and beat Anzu, he was probably, in his 20s, in their terms as opposed to our terms. So that was that. And also Ninsharag, probably pronounced wrong, stopped at Mars. Now, she stopped at Mars on the way to Earth 315,000 years ago. Was there atmosphere on Mars at that point? Mainstream media tell us that 4 billion years ago was the last time Mars had atmosphere, but we all know mainstream lie. So, was there atmosphere? Did she land on Mars and stay there for a short period and then move on to Earth? Which seems a logical thing, just to sit in a spaceship on Mars and then carry on to Earth seems illogical. So there must have been some sort of atmosphere there. Now, there's some people have said that there was an indigenous race on Mars before they had a war. Now, whether or not that war's to do with the Anunnaki, I'll get to that down the line on other videos. But there seems to be some sort of nuclear war that happened on Mars. And some people say there was an indigenous race on Mars that were the Chinese people, or looked like Chinese people. And they fled Mars and came to Earth. Now, whether or not this was after Ninsharag stayed on Mars, I don't know. So these are good questions to ask, because why didn't they use the Chinese people as slaves as opposed to creating humans on Earth if there was them there at that time? Obviously, if there was radiation from a nuclear war, then Ninsharag probably wouldn't have stayed on Mars. So any thoughts on these, I'd appreciate. There was a feature film called One Anunnaki that was due to be released. It was made in 2004 but never got released in 2006, which is a real shame. Now, if you look on the BFI website, it sort of just gives you who was involved, etc. But for whatever reason, it never got finished or never got released. And that led me to an idea, because I actually am a film director. I've directed 7 feature films. I've directed and produced films. I've edited films. I've done screenplays for other people. I've done screenplays for myself. So I'm quite versed. I was in Pinewood Studios. I had my own studios as well. Obviously this was not some time back, but before I did other bits and pieces, so I do lots of various different things. But then I thought, well, wonder if you guys would be interested if I set up a Kickstarter campaign, which is basically a funding site where you can chip in some money. Would you guys be interested in putting into a Kickstarter campaign? Now, the film would obviously be a feature film, shot primarily for cinema if we can get a distribution company for it, and there'll be parts in there that we can have for you guys if you're interested in being extras in the film. Obviously, if you can act, then let us know, and I would view your show reels, etc., and if possible try and cast some of you guys as well. So what do you think? Do you think the world would be interested in seeing what really happened in a movie format as opposed to what we get told now? Now, obviously, I would, if this was to go ahead, I would obviously collaborate with many of the well-known researchers that we all know and love and have seen on TV, just to make sure that I get it as accurate as possible, because I want people to see who the Anunnaki were, and not sort of be blindsided by what we're told now in sort of the Bibles and things. I would like to go back to our roots. If they can have the Bible and believe how that's written, but I would like to show a proper film showing exactly what's gone on with the Anunnaki. So let me know your thoughts, just so I know whether or not it's worth pursuing a Kickstarter campaign. Would you be interested in putting some money? It's not a lot. Normally people can put anything from sort of £1 to 500 quid if they want to, whatever, but no set limit. But I just want to know your thoughts. Would you be interested if I was to set that up and get the film made? Thanks for your time. This was your god, regardless of whether or not you even believe in religion. So this would have been Neptune or Poseidon, either Greek or Roman, or the original person, which because of their longevity of life, was actually Enki, which was a Anunnaki god. So that's one of the same, the god of water. So the Anunnakis, I'm just going through this because some people still get confused on who people are and what they are in relation. So there was 12 gods, which were Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki race is actually called the Elohim. So there was 12 Elohim that called themselves gods. Enki, Enlil, the dad, and so on. Now these were 8 to 10 foot tall, and they were, although they were Elohim and Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, which translates those from heaven, came to earth, but we have to replace heaven for space because we got it wrong when we translated it many years ago. So the Anunnaki are just workers. They're just normal, like we are, me and you, who's watching this now. We're not gods. We're not royal. So these were, the royals, because he was a prince. So they called themselves gods here on Earth. So the Anunnaki are literally just workers, really, or just normal people that live did live on Nibiru, which was their home planet. So we can tell all of that because of the elongated skulls that we found that belong to Anunnaki. Now, a Nephilim is a descendant, an offspring from human women and the Anunnaki. So Anunnaki was, as I say, 10 to 12 foot tall. So once they had relationships, they had offspring, and they became giants, the offspring, and they were called Nephilim. And we know that because the bones from Smithsonian, etc., that it was hidden, and the information that's given to us in ancient texts, cutting down to size, was the same size as a man, human, up to their knees. So that's how big the Nephilim got. Angels are just workers, like military type people for the Anunnaki. So if you hear the word angel, same goes for archangel. They're just a higher up, like a commander or a captain or something. So angels were real. If you read the original text, you can see that they're absolutely real. They're not sort of floating ghosty things. The spirits are different, but angels were just another name for military or police. And a fallen angel is an Anunnaki that had relationships with humans but shouldn't have. So the fallen is a word for sort of disowned or dishonored. Tablet of Destiny. Dun dun dun. So I've mentioned before that Anzu, or Zu as he's also known, stole the tablet away from Enlil and flew off with it, and then was chased, and subsequently they got it back. And at that point, to be honest, I didn't know what the Tablet of Destiny was. So I've done some research. Turns out it's a legal document that was done by King Anu, which was Enlil's dad. And it basically says that Enlil is the supreme god of Earth, the chief god, whatever you want to call him. So that's all it was. And you can understand why Zu, or Anzu, stole it. Now, if you remember, Anzu, or Zu, his dad, or grandfather, should I say, his grandfather was Alalulu, who was a king, if you've watched my other videos, was king prior to King Anu being king. And obviously they got in that fight, and Alalulu bit the private parts of King Anu. So that was his grandfather. So it makes sense why Anzu stole the tablets after his father had passed away on Mars. That was Alalulu passed away on Mars. He then went to the Aigi, then came down and persuaded Enlil that he's a good guy and he'll help work with him. And at that point, he stole the tablet. So in other words, he was trying to dethrone Enlil from being the real king of real god of Earth. So that kind of all made sense. Now I just want to throw out something that might be interesting to people. Michael Tellinger, now I know he's in South Africa, or Abzu as it's called, but he does these weekends away, sort of like tours and things, and he does one that's coming up now, and he does them every so often, so it's worth going to his website. If I was in around in his country at that time, I would love to do this, because I mean we're talking here about him showing giant stuff and the gold mines and everything else, and proving that there was gold mines, because it's easy for me to say there was ancient gold mines, and people say, well, show me this guy actually does show you them, real ancient gold mines. So give him a look. He's michaeltellinger.com. If you are available and want to go to anyone, and it's not just this date, he does other dates as well, so it's worth subscribing to his website. Okay, hope that helps. I've had people on my posts saying Nephilim when really I'm talking about the Anunnaki, but they're calling them Nephilim, and I'm like, no, Nephilim are the giants. How can you get it wrong? And then I was trying to rattle my brains. Why would people be calling them the Nephilim instead of Anunnaki? Or Elohim, as their rightful names are, the race. And then I remember Zecharia Sitchin's first book, 1976. He called them Nephilim instead of, as well as Anunnaki. But since then, I'll just prove that he's kind of worked out they were the giants.
Excuse me, my teacher, why do you say giants when the word in Hebrew is Nephilim?
So, although the Nephilim are offspring of Anunnaki and humans, technically they are still alien-ish. So they have come from another planet per se, but mixed with us. Okay, so I found a guy on the internet debunking Zecharia Sitchin, and it's actually a person that I sent a message to probably 15 years ago, because he had wrote back then on his website, this was his words, princely seeds was the description of the Anunnaki, not those from heaven came to earth, as possibly suggested by Sitchin. However, a few other people has also gone along similar to what Sitchin's saying, with different variations of those who came to Earth. But this chap was the only one that mentioned that I could see that was saying about princely seeds. Now, I sent him a message back then saying, you do realise that you've actually agreed with Sitchin, meaning that they have to have been Anunnaki, or they have to have been alien, because they were the two princes, Enlil and Enki, which makes sense if you're going to call the Anunnaki princely seeds. And we know from historical texts that their father wasn't around until way later. So they had to have come from somewhere. They couldn't have just appeared. So you see where I'm going with that. If the records show, the true texts show that Enlil and Enki turned up here, then their father wasn't here, so they did come from heaven. So I can see why Sitchin. But here's that chap. Have a watch.
When he makes his translations, like for example, when he translated the word Anunnaki, right? Now, what did I told you that the word means of royal seed, okay? But he...
Okay, now there's a contradiction there, because when I sent him the message, he said princely seeds. That was... Anyway, he replied, but it was just waffle, and he knew that I was smarter than him, so forgive me for that. But let's just look at this chap here anyway. There he is, Dr. David, I won't even pronounce his name. Now, he actually used to work for universities, and one of them was University of California. And those that know my videos know that I do a little bit more research. Turns out our friends, the Rockefeller Foundation, funds that same university, so there's no way he was going to be saying there's aliens, because the Rockefeller Foundation do not want people to know. David does, the one of the sons wanted people to know, but as a whole, the Rockefellers don't want people to know. So when you add the Rockefeller in with a guy that's debunking Sitchin, you know Sitchin was probably more accurate than this guy. That's my opinion. Hopefully you tell me what your opinion is. Thanks. Adam and Eve were created by the Anunnaki, and I've been asked how tall were Adam and Eve. So basically, if you actually look online, it says that they were 91 foot tall. Now, we know that there was giants, but the humans, the Homo sapiens sapiens, were not the giants. And if the Anunnaki allowed 91 foot Homo sapiens to continue, they would have been, they would have been they would have been tread on. So the Anunnaki didn't allow a 91 foot, and that's why they actually tried to wipe out the giants, the Nephilim, later on, because they didn't want that kind of mixed bloodline with giants. So they were actually between 4 to 6 foot generally. And we can see, carvings of the Anunnaki there with smaller people, which obviously was the Homo. After Adam with a U was first created, not to get confused with Ali with an I, Princess Nungsharagagag had to keep trying to produce more babies because, and this is artificially done, because obviously Adam needed to procreate and there was no one around. So the Anunnaki were displeased that their princess goddess was actually doing this and using her womb to sort of pump out babies. So they come up with the idea of using a rib and taking the DNA from that and actually trying to create a female version of Adam, which they did. Enlil found out and told them, right, get them to work in the mines in Abzu, which is where they were, South Africa. So Adam then had relationships with this newfound Eve to produce offspring, but it's not what you think, it's not who you think they are. So Adam and Eve were here 300,000 years ago. Yeah, happy birthday. And since then, we move on now to 200,000 years ago. So 100,000 years had passed. During that period, Homo erectus had unfortunately vanished. Now, whether or not he or she, they were wiped out by humans, by Anunnaki, or just the cold. Now, going up to 200,000 years ago, it started back with the glacial periods again, so it was getting cold, and we can see that there. So it became a difficult time for the Anunnaki, but the humans populated the area, totally did all the mine work now, and were slaves to the Anunnaki, in Abzu and in Eden, which we know is Eden. During this period, the 100,000 years, the Anunnaki were actually having children themselves with themselves. So now we had, Earthling Anunnakis here. It was still around the 200,000 years ago mark when Enki and his son Murdoch went to the moon to see whether or not they can actually do anything there, if it's beneficial or anything, but they found it lifeless and pointless. So Enki's son Murdoch, nothing to do with the A-Team, Murdoch, and Enki around that time also started to work on the celestial timings of our planet. So it's at this point, I believe, that the Stonehenges, not necessarily the one in the UK, but certainly the Stonehenges were starting to be built. And you can see the reference that I made on another video about the Book of Enoch, where they talk about these sort of henges. We call them Stonehenges, obviously, but they called them gates, or I believe they called them gates. And it was then that they started to work out the times for the planets and our time. Around 200,000 years ago, Enki was getting annoyed with his brother because his brother pretty much had everything that he wanted. He was the god of the land, whereas Enki was the god of water, and as you know, there wasn't much going on with the water at that time. So Enki promised his son Murdoch that he would try and get him to become supreme ruler instead of Enlil, or at least, some sort of supreme ruler of some description. So Enki went to his father and said, "Dad, can you make Murdoch some sort of higher up person?" He said, "No." He said, "I'm going to give the new spaceport to Enlil's, I think, grandson or great grandson, Utu." So if we look there's Enlil, and it goes down the bloodline, and down here Utu got the main gig, and Murdoch ended up in Babylon. Okay, here's a plot twist you wouldn't have seen coming. So we're going to move on to about 100,000 years ago. So that's 200,000 years after Adam and Eve. Now, Adam and Eve, that we all know from the spare rib story, was a human male and a human female, and they procreated and had lots of kids and so on and so forth. Now, Enki, about 100,000 years ago, give or take, saw two women, human women, that he liked. Now, he had his wicked way with them. And so that's possibly the first interrelationship between Anunnakis and humans. So it was actually Enki that possibly started that. And the two women actually gave birth to a boy and a girl. And obviously, you're wondering what their names were. Their names were, Adam and Eve again. But this time they were, so Adam's human and Eve's obviously female woman. But look, that's the names, Titi and Adpa. Now, you've got to ask yourself, how tall were these children? Because we know the sons, as they in the Bibles, etc., sons of the Anunnaki were tall. They became the Nephilim, the giants. So Enki actually took the two children back to Eden. Yes, so now we've got a sort of a double type story of Adam and Eve. So we've now got a real Adam and Eve, as well as the Adam and Eve with the rib. So this is where the Bible obviously may be getting mixed up. So we've now got Enki's Adam and Eve. So now we've got the two new children from royal blood that grew up. There's no real description of their heights. I don't think it was the 91 foot high, but they were classed as royal blood. Now this could explain why some people on this planet has Rh negative, if these Adam and Eve had a bloodline, and obviously that bloodline, we'll talk about bloodlines later on, and that bloodline became sacred compared to the other humans that were around at the time. The new royals, Adam and Eve, which were human half-breds, actually had children together, and we know the story of Cain, Abel and Seth. Because these were Enki's children, or grandchildren as the lineage went on, Noah was the one that Enki had said, look, build a boat, because we're trying to, I'm trying to save you. Because this is so important, I thought I'd go over it again. So, Enki, the alien that came down to Earth about 300,000 years ago, created the first human from a Neanderthal, which is what I'm pointing the camera at now. So he created the first Adam, which was a hybrid of the Neanderthal possibly and the Anunnaki, and then he created a female version. Now them two ended up having kids and so on, and worked in the mines, and they lived for probably about 50 years or less than that even. Now that's the Adam and Eve that we know of that was created with the rib. So the Adam and Eve that we actually know here that lived for a lot longer was because Enki 100,000 years ago, that's 200,000 years after Homo sapiens sapiens were working in mines, gold mines for the Anunnaki and roaming the lands, etc. So that's 200 years after, that's 100,000 years ago, Enki had relationships with two human women and had two children by the two different women. One had a boy and one had a girl, Adam and Eve. Although that's not their real names. Look at my last video and it explains what they were actually called. But so Adam and Eve is just basically man and female. Now, Enki looked after these children because they were his bloodline and he was the prince. He was also classed as a god. And that is why we have a record of their lineage, of who they had children with and so on and so forth, which you can see here. Whereas the first humans, the Adam and Eve that we just spoke about with the rib, they had no one bothered writing anything for them. They, 300,000 years ago, they were just slaves. They were born to be slaves. But because Enki wanted to look after them, because they were now his sort of offspring, that's the reason why we now have this information here with a lineage. And that could also suggest why there's different coloured skins. Now, I'm not going to say which way round because people seem to be angry if I don't say it the way they want them to be. But so you've got Neanderthal and Anunnaki produced humans, which might be one skin colour. And then you had the Anunnaki actually having proper relationships instead of genetically modifying with human women, which produced Adam and Eve, which could have been a different skin colour. So this is how we may get skin colours. To back up my claims that there are two Adam and Eves that we know of. So the first Adam and Eve was the first Homo sapiens sapiens 300,000 years ago, genetically modified by the Anunnaki. So we know that, there's pretty much proof of that. But that doesn't mean that they were the Adam and Eve that we know, because their time span 300,000 years ago, the Great Flood was supposedly only 4,359 years ago. So there's a difference of 295,000 years. Now, if we look at their bloodlines, they didn't live that amount of time, 130 years, 135, and so on. So they wouldn't have been able to be here for the flood if the flood was that amount of time away when they were born. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why there was two lots of Adam. If we agree that the Anunnaki in one form or another created humans, whether or not it was DNA in a test tube or whether it was breeding with them, if we agree that that's possible, the chances of that the Anunnaki's DNA matched and was able to actually produce any humans from the indigenous species on Earth at the time is pretty remarkable, in the fact that you could actually have two species very similar. Now, Zecharia Sitchin in his book 12th Planet suggests that Nibiru, billions of years ago, before it had proper life on it, smashed into Earth before we had proper life on it, and it created life because there was life, some small resemblance of life on Nibiru, and then that got transferred to Earth. And so he then says that, obviously down the line, we've all got the same sort of DNA, etc. Now, I struggle with that, and I mean, I am a fan of Sitchin's, but sometimes I have to say something that doesn't quite work out. So what he's saying is, because the Anunnaki has the same DNA structures, and we all came from the same microbes or the same creatures that came from the splitting of the two planets, the hitting of the two planets, he's saying that therefore Neanderthal and the Anunnaki should be able to breed in some fashion, which is what he's suggesting. But the problem with that is we can't breed with sheep, we can't breed with any other animal other than humans on Earth. So he's saying that the Anunnaki could quite happily breed with Neanderthal or one of those species, but I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this, but the logic doesn't make sense, because it's just one creature on this whole planet. Now, if Neanderthal wasn't here, the Anunnaki wouldn't have been, if none of those four species, Homo florensis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal was here at the time, then they wouldn't have been able to do it, because no other species on this planet would have been able to have the same structure that they could have done that with. They couldn't procreate with any other species on this planet. So I'm hoping you understand what I'm trying to say. So he's saying that they could, but I'm saying there's only one species, and they were very lucky that should actually match. So I don't think it's the planet. Obviously, if you don't understand what I'm trying to say, I'm struggling here trying to articulate it, but hopefully you kind of get what I'm saying. Let me know in the comments if you sort of understand. Otherwise, I'll do another video and maybe rephrase it a lot better. Sorry. A question I often ask myself is, how come the Anunnaki are so smart yet they couldn't have robots? And a few people have asked the same question now, so I thought I'd address this. Now, we're never gonna really know the answer to all of this, but we can look at this together. So we know they're advanced enough to have space travel. So if we break this down, so on their planet they may have had different materials to us on Earth. For example, they may have had rocks and stones, just like we've got quartz. They may have had, and we've got magnetic stones that can hold magnetic forces. They may have other materials that can do similar sort of things, but maybe even produce energy. So they could have based their whole civilization on, for example, a magnetic system. Now, if we didn't have electric, and bearing in mind electric's only fairly recently, we would have still been using steam-powered or gas or coal. So if we rule out electric, would we have got to the moon without electric? We probably would. We probably would have found a way to get to the moon using some other methods. It may have took a little bit longer, but we probably would have done it without electricity. So that's one reason why they could have space travel. They could be, you know, the rockets and everything that they're using may not necessarily have electrical components. It may literally be gears and levers, you know, just like in the olden days when planes used to have gears and levers before they started to have electronics. So we can say, okay, maybe they're advanced in some ways. DNA. Now, they're obviously been around a lot longer than us because they created us. So they have probably got to that point now that they can figure out DNA just as we have. Stone structures. Now, they've obviously got stone structures on their planet just from the ancient texts. So they've been building stone structures for a long time, way longer than we have, and now we just sort of use concrete and things like that and robots to build structures. But if they manually did it themselves, then they would have that down to fine precision. Levitation. Now, they have got levitation, I totally believe, using sound acoustics. So again, if they didn't have electricity and they were forced to use other means of devising technical equipment, then levitation using sound wouldn't be a bad thing to do. That way they wouldn't need these big digging machines and things like that we have now. And they obviously know about the ley lines. I'm guessing they probably got ley lines on their planet because they knew exactly where to build the ancient monuments directly on ley lines to enhance the power from the earth. I'll carry this on the next video. In my last video, I was just showing how the Anunnaki could be advanced, but yet slightly behind us in some ways. So I'm just going to move on to the not advanced now. So we know they use swords. There's many depictions of them. They talk about them, etc. So why not a ray gun? Again, that would require some sort of small energy device that they may not have. They may not have grasped lasers or even sort of the electric that we understand as electric that we're using now. They may be using a different form of electric, which is based from the earth, which I mentioned earlier. So swords would be plausible for a race that don't have the technology to build lasers. And yes, you could say, well, why didn't they build guns? But maybe they're not as war race like as we are. We are a very war race. So that to me, that, you know, that's logical. So they come from the stars, but just because they come from space doesn't mean they have to have ray guns. Now, they used boats, and this is to move some of the stones around, and they did actually do that. I know later on, obviously in Egypt, we 100% know they did that, but at the time they were supposedly using boats to move things around. And no, not to the underworld, as the story goes. But yeah, they did use boats. And why didn't they use their flying machines that they've got? Personally, I think they probably had a limited number of these craft instead of an unlimited number. And I don't think the craft were, because of they used rocket fuel of some description, because we know this from the ancient texts and about the fire and the light that comes from the back of their flying device. So, you know, are they just going to keep using all their fuel? We don't know where their fuel comes from. It may have come from their own home planets. They may have been bringing their fuel here just to power their ships to take the gold back to their. So I can understand boats. It's a logical thing. We still use boats, even though we've got, you know, aeroplanes and things. Their language is another one that's actually not very advanced. So when you break down, say for example, the Book of Enoch, they would write things like, and in those days, you know, it's a lot of wasted language. I mean, we're now getting to the point where we type M8 for mate. So they have a lot of sort of wasted language, I think. So that makes them slightly behind in language compared to we are now, I think. I might be wrong. I'll carry this on the next video. Just following on from the last two videos about the Anunnaki and their advanced tech, or lack of. So, have a look at this gentleman's nice beard. And most of them are, I think pretty much all of them are depicted with a beard of some sort, possibly except for the Aegis, which were the younger ones. So obviously a beard is a stature for them, I would imagine. Now, I've put down here razor blades, so I'm just obviously joking there, but they obviously didn't want to cut their beards, so it's and it wasn't just for the gods. I think the other Anunnakis also had the beards. So then you got to the last category, which was they possibly had but maybe eroded away. So the logic would suggest that they should have had roads, certainly in Sumeria, Mesopotamia, where they first set up base, which was one of the longest running locations for them. But there's not really evidence of roads as such, so they didn't tarmac it. Obviously paths were made, but they didn't put these down as a longevity type of thing. Even though they were here for hundreds of thousands of years, you would have thought they would have done something different, but they didn't. And there's no records of that to show, you know, their sort of road structure. Obviously Romans came along and started building roads, but the Anunnaki, who was here a lot longer than the Romans, didn't. Now you've got to ask then, why didn't they do long-term structures? And that someone else actually asked the same question. They said, well, why are they not here now? Same reason that they came here. They wanted one thing, and they got that one thing, and then they bugged off. So they weren't here to set up a home. They weren't here to take over the planet. They were here to get the gold to help their own planet. So once they've done that, that's it. So there was no need for them, even though they was here for hundreds of thousands of years, there was no need for them to build permanent structures. You could argue, well, the pyramids are permanent, but that was to help them. It wasn't permanent structures like we build now, like we build all sorts of rubbish structures that we don't actually use, and I mean O2 and things that we, you know, we don't build. They didn't build needless stuff. And the other thing is cables or wires. I'm sure they had the ability to have them, because there were some descriptions in Egypt, for example, of some sort of cable looking things, but these would have, over 100,000 years, they would have totally eroded away. So we would never know really if they had some sort of wire capability of whatever it is that they would be using that wire for. So I hope you've enjoyed these few videos on power and tech. To back up my theory that there was two Adam and Eves, the first one 300,000 years ago, genetically modified by the Anunnaki. They had children, and those children had children, and spread throughout the planet, and that was 300,000 years ago. Then you've got within 100,000 years, Enki had relationships with the Earth women that was produced 300,000 years ago. And they had children, and those children were Adam and Eve, and then those children had children, Cain, Abel, Seth, etc. Now, that lineage went right up to Noah, and we know that the flood possibly happened around 5,000 years ago, give or take. So have a watch of this video here.
Mapping the human genome, Dr. Hawks found that in the past 5,000 years, our DNA has evolved at a rate 100 times greater than any previous 5,000-year period in our history.
So what happened in the last 5,000 years?
So what actually happened there, then it corroborates my story, is that the Adam and Eve and the Noahs then had children. So now you've got two different types of species on this planet. One which was 300,000 years ago, which was genetically modified, and now you've got the Anunnaki, true bloodline of the Anunnaki, creating that different DNA strand, which is why in 5,000 years, which is when the flood happened, give or take, there was a blast of new life on this planet which had different DNA to the previous 3,000 years, 300,000 years. So I hope that kind of makes sense for you. Don't hate me for what my findings suggest. So, 300,000 years ago, first man and woman were hybrids from Neanderthal. The Anunnaki created that, and their offspring from those first 300,000 years ago worked in the mines in South Africa. Then go along to sort of 100,000 years or 60,000 years, not 100% sure. The Anunnaki then bred, certainly Enki did, with 2 human women that was originally one of those type, and they had Adam and Eve, and now those Adam and Eve were in the Middle East. Now this could explain the colour difference between people in one place to another. While Enki had his children there, he wanted to teach them. He believed that these his offspring were able to be taught, so he took them to Eden and taught them and clothed them. I want to know what your thoughts are now. You've probably watched all my videos, if not, why not? Now, what do you think? Do you think I'm on the right track? The Anunnaki were really here? Or do you still think that there's sort of one main god? Or do you not believe in either? And I'm also interested to know if you was the believer of one sort of true god and then watched my videos, have you changed your thoughts? Just let me know what you think. I'm really interested to know how you know, if any of this has persuaded you or made you open your eyes. Let me know. Continuing on from 100,000 years ago then, the Anunnaki were taking the gold back to their home planet and sprinkling it in their atmosphere, which seems to have been working, so yay, well done to them. Now, the reason why it's said that their planet had doing an atmosphere is written that it's possibly to do with a volcano. Now, there's also another name for a pyramid, which is volcano. So the story sort of goes like that the volcanoes that were active started to become dormant, and that's what's caused the problem. But logic would have said to me the other way around, that the volcanoes were active and that's what's caused the problem. But either way, it seems to have been working, and they continued mining for gold. You ain't gonna believe what Adam and Eve did. Well, Eve stayed on Earth, but Adam, or Adapa, was actually taken to Nibiru, the planet Nibiru, by Enki. And while on the planet, he was treated very well because he was actually part royal blood now because of being Prince Enki's son. And King Anu gave him some seeds, plant seeds, etc., corn. So when he come back, he would be able to start growing some barley type wheat and etc. And they also showed or gave Adapa some way of creating domesticated sheep for when he returned back here, so he would have the ability to grow wool, etc. This is for the people that say to me, where does it say what I'm talking about in the Holy Bible? So I'm just going to sort of educate you guys. You do realise that the Holy Bible is a copy of ancient texts, all types of texts, Sumerian, Aramaic, Babylonian. So these texts here are 4,000 plus years older than the Bible. So you can see, obviously, that these came first. So once you realise these came first, and you realise that the Bible is a copy of these, unfortunately, some things that they weren't great at translating back then, and some things that they wanted to hide from you guys for whatever reason. And we know that because the Bible, the Ethiopian Bible, actually had a lot of the proper ancient texts correctly, including the Book of Enoch. Unfortunately, there seems to be a problem with people changing the Bible as it goes along, even though the Word of God was never supposed to be changed. But so unfortunately, the Bibles that you've got are missing loads of information. Now, just to sort of help you guys, there's websites out there that actually are trying to catalogue the ancient text, so you can actually then see that everything is based on the original ancient text, even the Bible. So when someone says to me, where does it say it in the Bible? Like I say, unfortunately, people, humans, for whatever reason, whether it's greed or just didn't want people to know our true history, they changed the Bible. Don't hate me for this. It's not me. I'm just telling you it's true. You know that by reading many different Bibles. There's things being taken out of it. Enoch ends up virtually, in the last Bibles, virtually only mentioned once, I believe. So just remember, when you say to me, where does it say it in the Bible is not the be-all and end-all. You have to go back. You have to do a bit of research, unfortunately, and you'll see that it was written originally in the ancient texts before the Bible even came along. So I hope this helps for people that say to me, where is it in the Bible? When Adam came back from the planet Nibiru, he mated with Eve, and they had 3 children: Cain, Abel, Seth, and possibly others. Now, Adam brought back some wheat and barley, etc., from their home planet, and Cain became a farmer and was helped by Ninurta, who we all know of if you've watched my other videos. So he became the farmer, and Abel started to look after the livestock, which was also possibly brought back from the planet Nibiru by Adam, and he was helped by Murdoch, probably pronounced wrong. So you can see how this whole story now plays out properly, makes more sense than what you read, unfortunately, in the watered down, copied and changed Bible. Cain and Abel. So we all know the story of the brothers. So what actually happened was they both took their products, which was corn and wheat, etc., that they had produced, and animal livestock, to Enlil and Enki. Enlil was very happy with the work that they had done. Clearly they could be taught, they were smart, and he was very happy and praised them. Enki only praised Abel for whatever reason. So Abel then started to taunt Cain many a time, saying, Enki, thinks we're wonderful, blah, 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 or thinks I'm wonderful. And that ended up in a fight. And that fight lasted until, well, we know what happened. One of them got whacked with the stone and died. Hands up, who knows which one died. After Cain killed Abel, he was very upset. Eventually news travelled to Enki, who was very, very upset, very angered, and so was Murdoch, and probably Ninurta too. So it was a whole big thing. So Murdoch actually wanted Cain to be executed, but they decided to go with the judges of 7, which I've mentioned before. And the 7 was about to put Cain to death, but Enki ruled and said, no, look, let's banish him instead, because he's sort of royal bloodline, we can keep him going, whatever, but let's just banish him. So he managed to persuade the court of 7 to banish Cain. So Cain left a place called Eden, or Eden, as we all know it was called. After Cain was banished, he went off to different lands. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that over 300,000 years ago, the first Adam and Eve was created, and those people had children, and those children had children, etc. Right up for over 200,000 years before Cain was around, they had kids, etc. So when Cain went off to different lands, he actually ended up mating with one of those other types. So where Cain is a descendant of an Anunnaki and human, he mated with a descendant of Neanderthal and Anunnaki, if that makes sense. He had children with this person, and eventually he died from a stone falling on him. I'm guessing they were trying to build something, and obviously didn't have the same technology that the Anunnaki did. So that's the end of Cain. If you're interested, there's a good site that has just sort of a timeline that you can actually scroll and scrub across. So here we're talking where it believes the deluge came from. Now, mainstream sort of say possibly 5,000 years, whereas this is saying 10,000 years ago. But you can scroll across and have a look what happens in different timelines. So the link to that, I'll paste it as well, is this link here. time.graphics/line/240833. I'll pin it to the comments. Just trying to show that the Anunnaki were 8 to 10 foot tall. If you look at any of the ancient buildings that the gods supposedly lived in, you'll see that the doorways or the arches are all approximately 13 foot or taller, and that's because although the Anunnakis are 10 foot, they used to wear hats as well. So you can go down to Egypt as well, you can go to Rome, Greece and so on, and you'll see that all these doorways that they have, these archways for the gods, are absolutely huge, and that kind of makes sense when the Anunnaki are that tall. Technically, Adam and Eve were Nephilim, giants. Now, mainstream sort of say they were 91 foot tall. I wouldn't have said they were that tall. I would have said they were tall but not that tall. But that's when, around that time, is when other Anunnaki started having relationships with humans, which created the Nephilim, the giants. So here it says in Genesis, the sons of God. Now that would have been Marduk, Ninurta, people like that were the sons of God. However, the normal Anunnaki also had relationships with the beautiful women that it says in the Bible, human women, and they are. Now, as we look through different versions of the Bibles, obviously it translates differently. You've got Nephilim or fallen angels. Now, the fallen angels were the Anunnaki, the deposed Anunnaki. So forget the word angels. It was just deposed Anunnaki that had relationships. They shouldn't have had relationships, and therefore they were classed as the fallen angels. The third son of Adam, Seth. Now, very little spoken about Seth. Now, the dad, Adam, was about 130 years old when he had Seth. Now, that would actually make sense, because if he is a genetic, Adam was a genetic offspring, not DNA offspring, from one of the Anunnakis that lived for a lot longer than us, then 130 years makes sense. Now, if you look at Adam and Eve's lineage, going down to Noah, they all lived a lot longer than we do now, so that would make sense if they were half Anunnaki. There's very little said about Seth, other than his mum and dad eventually ended up after him. He was the last one that was written about. After him, apparently, his mum and dad, Adam and Eve, had 30 more children, women, female, and 30 more male. So 60 more children, but no one wrote about those. 450 videos and still going strong. I'd like to thank absolutely everyone that joins in on the discussions and on the live chats that I also do, and those people on YouTube that are watching silently, but I know you're watching, so thank you very much. Now, my views on TikTok have gone right down, unfortunately. I think it's probably something to do with maybe me posting these videos. Maybe someone doesn't like the idea of me posting these videos, but regardless of that, I'm happy for the people that are watching, and I've got over 80,000 people that follow me, which is fantastic. To each and every one of you, I'm not going to name you all, probably because I can't pronounce half people's names. I'm terrible, but thank you, and I will continue going for you guys because you're all fantastic. Thank you. Hi everyone, I was just going to ask a small favour. Now, you know, I put my live chats as well as the videos on YouTube. I do them in segments of 5, also do them in segments of 50, so people can sit and watch 50 in one whole go, or watch or listen at least to the live chats. I'd like to try and put live chats direct onto YouTube, but I need 1,000 subscribers, and so far I've only got 715. It won't let me do a live simultaneous. I want to do the same thing that I do with TikTok, but I want to do it on another phone with YouTube. So I'm just wondering if anyone wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel to get me to over that 1,000 so I can put them on YouTube. That would be great. Thank you very much for your time.